Ambassador Sarah Chen adjusted her collar one last time before stepping into the grand chamber of the Galactic Council. The massive dome stretched above her, filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. Each species sat in their designated sections, their alien forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that still amazed her even after 3 years of diplomatic service. The Zephyrians floated in their gas-filled bubbles, their tentacles swaying gently. The crystalline Vorthak reflected the chamber's lights like living prisms. The insectoid klaxons clicked their mandibles in what humans had learned was their version of polite conversation. And there, in the center seats reserved for the founding species, sat the Drakmari with their scaled hides and cold reptilian eyes. Sarah took her place at the human delegation's modest table. As one of the newest species to join the council, humanity was given a small section near the back. The message was clear: you're here, but you don't matter yet. They had been trying to change that perception for years, always with smiles, always with patience, always playing by the rules that others had written long before humans even discovered fire. "The session will now begin," announced Councillor Vextar, the Drakmari who served as this cycle's session leader. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been questioned. "Today we address the petition submitted by the human delegation regarding trade route accessibility through the Meridian sector." Sarah stood slowly, her heart beating faster than she would have liked. This was humanity's third attempt to gain access to the profitable trade routes that connected the inner systems to the resource-rich outer colonies. Each previous attempt had been politely dismissed with bureaucratic language that meant nothing and led nowhere. "Honorable counselors," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of thousands of alien eyes upon her. "Humanity once again respectfully requests consideration for trade access to the Meridian sector. Our merchant fleets have proven their reliability and safety standards exceed Council requirements. Our goods have found eager markets throughout the galaxy, and our peaceful intentions have been demonstrated through 3 years of consistent cooperation with all Council regulations." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some species whispered among themselves, while others simply stared with expressions that ranged from mild interest to barely concealed contempt. The humans had heard it all before: too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable, too human. Councillor Vextar didn't even look up from his data pad as he responded. "The Council acknowledges the human petition. However, given the sensitive nature of the Meridian sector and its strategic importance to established trade partnerships, we must decline this request. Perhaps in another few decades, when humanity has proven its long-term commitment to peaceful coexistence, such access might be reconsidered." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. She had expected this response, but hope had made her believe that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time the Council would see humans as equals rather than children to be tolerated. "Councillor Vexistar," Sarah said, her voice still level and professional. "With respect, humanity has already demonstrated 3 years of peaceful cooperation. Our safety records exceed those of several species already granted trade access. Our economic contributions to Council member worlds have been substantial. What specific criteria must we meet to be considered worthy of equal treatment?" A few species shifted uncomfortably at Sarah's directness. In Council chambers, such pointed questions were considered somewhat rude, but still within acceptable diplomatic bounds. Vextar finally looked up, his reptilian features showing nothing but mild annoyance at having his decision questioned. "Young species often mistake participation for readiness," Vextar replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was already over. "The Council's decision is final. Next petition." But Sarah didn't sit down. Something inside her had reached a limit that she hadn't even known existed until this moment. 3 years of smiling while being insulted. 3 years of accepting scraps while watching less capable species receive privileges. 3 years of being told they weren't ready while proving themselves over and over again. "I'm sorry, counselor," Sarah said, and several aliens near the human section noticed something different in her voice. The polite diplomatic tone was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something that sounded almost dangerous. "But I don't think you understood my question." The chamber fell completely silent. Even the klaxons stopped their clicking. No one had ever responded to a council decision with anything but acceptance. This was simply not done. Vexatar's scaled features showed the first real expression Sarah had seen from him: surprise mixed with growing anger. "Ambassador Chen, the council's decision has been rendered. Your continued protests are both inappropriate and irrelevant." Sarah looked around the chamber, taking in the hundreds of alien faces staring at her. Some looked shocked, others curious, and a few seemed almost excited to see someone finally push back against the council's casual dismissals. She thought about all the reports she would write after this, all the diplomatic apologies she would have to craft, all the careful rebuilding of relationships this moment would require. Then she thought about the human colonies struggling without access to fair trade routes. She thought about the mining crews in the outer systems who worked twice as hard for half the pay because they couldn't access the same markets as other species. She thought about every human who had believed that joining the Galactic Council would mean joining as equals, not as permanent second-class citizens. Sarah Chen, who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of diplomatic smiles and careful words, felt something shift inside her chest. The mask she had worn since arriving at the council was becoming unbearably heavy, and for the first time since humanity had joined this august body, she decided to let it slip just a little. "Counselor Vextar," she said, her voice still perfectly polite but carrying an undertone that made several nearby species lean back in their seats. "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of our request." The Drakmari counselor's eyes narrowed. "There is no misunderstanding, Ambassador. Your species has been denied access to the Meridian sector. The decision is final." Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering this response very carefully. When she spoke again, her words were measured and precise, but somehow they seemed to carry more weight than any diplomatic speech she had ever given. "You know what, Counselor? You're absolutely right. There's no misunderstanding at all. I understand perfectly now." The way she said it made the hair on the back of every mammalian neck in the chamber stand up. Even species that didn't have hair felt an inexplicable chill. Sarah Chen was still smiling her diplomatic smile, still speaking in perfectly proper council common, but something fundamental had changed in her demeanor. Vexatar seemed to sense it too, though he couldn't quite identify what was different. "Then we may proceed to the next petition." "Of course," Sarah agreed pleasantly. "Though I do have one small clarification to make before we move on." She paused, looking around the chamber with that same diplomatic smile that had served her so well for 3 years, but now it seemed less warm and more sharp, like the edge of a very well-maintained blade. "When humanity requested permission to join the Galactic Council 3 years ago, we were told that membership would grant us equal status with all other member species. We were told that our contributions would be valued and our voices would be heard. We were told that the Council operates on principles of mutual respect and fair treatment for all." Her voice remained perfectly level, but somehow each word seemed to land with increasing weight. Several counselors found themselves paying closer attention than they had intended. "Now, I want to make absolutely certain that I understand the current situation correctly," Sarah continued, still smiling that increasingly unsettling smile. "Are you telling me that those initial representations were inaccurate?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Vextar's reptilian features showed confusion mixed with growing unease. This wasn't how these sessions were supposed to go. Young species were supposed to accept council decisions gracefully and try again later. They weren't supposed to ask pointed questions that made everyone uncomfortable. Ambassador Chen, I fail to see the relevance of— Oh, the relevance is quite simple, Sarah interrupted, and the fact that she had interrupted a council session leader sent shocked whispers through the chamber. I'm trying to determine whether humanity was deliberately deceived about the terms of our membership, or whether the council has simply decided to change those terms without notification. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah's smile never wavered, but now it was starting to remind several species of predators they had encountered on their home worlds. Predators that smiled just before they struck. Because, Sarah continued in that same pleasant, diplomatic tone, if we were deliberately deceived, then we have a very different problem than if the Council has simply chosen to breach the terms of our membership agreement. And I want to make sure we address the correct problem. For the first time in Council history, Vextar found himself at a complete loss for words. This human ambassador was still technically within the bounds of proper diplomatic discourse, but somehow she had managed to turn a simple trade request into a fundamental challenge to the Council's authority and integrity, and she was doing it all with that terrifying diplomatic smile. The chamber remained silent as hundreds of alien minds tried to process what they were witnessing. The humans, who had spent 3 years being the perfect junior members of the galactic community, had just drawn a line in the sand. And they had done it in such a way that any response from the Council would be an admission of either deception or breach of contract. Sarah Chen stood perfectly still, waiting for an answer, her smile never wavering. But now everyone in the chamber could see what had been hidden behind that diplomatic mask for 3 long years. And they were beginning to understand that perhaps they had seriously underestimated humanity. The silence in the council chamber stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Ambassador Sarah Chen maintained her diplomatic smile, while Councillor Vexatar struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't validate her accusations. The other species watched with growing fascination as the usually submissive humans had somehow managed to corner the mighty Drakmari leadership with nothing but words and logic. Finally, Vextar's composure cracked slightly. Ambassador Chen, your implications are highly inappropriate. The Council operates with complete integrity in all its dealings. Sarah's smile brightened, which somehow made it even more unsettling. Oh, wonderful! So we're in complete agreement that humanity should receive equal treatment under Council protocols. Thank you for clarifying that, Counselor. Now, regarding our trade access to the Meridian sector— The decision stands, Vextar snapped, his diplomatic facade slipping. Regardless of your creative interpretations of Council policy. The moment those words left his mouth, every political mind in the chamber recognized the mistake. Vexatar had just admitted that the Council's decisions weren't based on policy or fairness, but on something else entirely, something that directly contradicted his previous statement about the Council's integrity. Sarah's expression didn't change, but her voice took on a tone of innocent curiosity that made several experienced diplomats wince in sympathy for what was coming next. I'm sorry, Counselor, but now I'm genuinely confused. You just confirmed that the Council operates with complete integrity and treats all members equally, but you're also saying that our perfectly reasonable trade request, which meets all stated requirements, is being denied for reasons that have nothing to do with our qualifications. Could you help me understand how these two statements can both be true? Murmurs began spreading through the chamber as various species started whispering among themselves. The Zephyrians' tentacles writhed with what humans had learned was their equivalent of nervous laughter. The crystalline Vorthax surfaces flickered with patterns that indicated intense interest. Even the usually stoic klaxons seemed more animated than usual. Counselor Vexitar realized he was trapped in a logical maze of his own making. Any answer he gave would either confirm that the council was dishonest or that their treatment of humanity was unfair. His reptilian features flushed slightly, a sign of stress that the veteran council members recognized. The council's decisions are based on complex factors that junior species cannot fully comprehend, Vextar said finally, falling back on condescension as his last defense. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if she found this explanation perfectly reasonable. Ah, I see. So when you say the council operates with integrity and equal treatment, you mean integrity and equal treatment as defined by standards that are deliberately kept secret from some members. That's actually very helpful clarification. Thank you. She turned to address the chamber directly, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast space. This explains so much about humanity's experience over the past 3 years. We've been operating under the mistaken assumption that equal membership meant equal access to the same rules and opportunities as everyone else. But now we understand that there's actually a two-tier system where some species get full transparency while others get creative interpretations. The whispers in the chamber grew louder. Several species were beginning to shift uncomfortably as they realized that Sarah's words could apply to their own experiences with the council. The humans weren't the only junior species who had struggled to gain meaningful access to council benefits. Vextar's voice rose slightly, betraying his growing frustration. You are deliberately mischaracterizing the council's processes. Am I? Sarah asked with genuine-sounding surprise. Then please, help me characterize them correctly. Explain to the chamber exactly which policies justify denying humanity trade access when we meet all stated requirements. I'm sure everyone would benefit from understanding these complex factors you mentioned. The trap was perfect. If Vextar explained the real reasons, that the Drakmari and their allies wanted to maintain their economic dominance, that humanity was being punished for being too successful too quickly, that fear and prejudice drove many council decisions, he would expose the corruption at the heart of the galactic government. If he refused to explain, he would confirm that the council operated in bad faith. Vexitar chose a third option that proved even worse than either alternative. The council is not required to justify its decisions to junior species, he declared with all the arrogance his position could muster. The effect was immediate and devastating. The chamber erupted in shocked voices as species throughout the dome realized what they had just heard. Vextar had just openly admitted that the council operated as a hierarchy where some members were more equal than others, directly contradicting centuries of official council doctrine about equality and fair representation. Sarah let the chaos continue for a full minute before speaking again, her voice somehow carrying over the tumult without being raised. Thank you, Counselor Vextar. I think that clarifies the situation perfectly. Her tone had changed again, and this time the shift was unmistakable. The diplomatic pleasantries were still there, but underneath them was something that made several predator species in the chamber instinctively tense. Sarah Chen was no longer playing the role of supplicant, hoping for council approval. She was something else entirely. Now that we all understand the true nature of council membership, Sarah continued as the chamber gradually fell silent again, I have some additional clarifications to make on behalf of humanity. She reached into her diplomatic case and withdrew a data pad, consulting it with the casual air of someone checking a shopping list. The mundane action somehow felt ominous in the charged atmosphere of the chamber. First, I want to formally notify the Council that humanity will no longer be participating in the Junior Species Development Program. Since the program is apparently designed to maintain inequality rather than prepare species for full membership, we see no benefit in continuing. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The development program was considered an honor. a way for new species to learn from their elders. No species had ever withdrawn from it voluntarily. Second, humanity will be conducting a comprehensive review of all Council policies and agreements to identify which ones apply to junior species and which ones apply to actual equal members. We want to make sure we're operating under the correct set of rules. Vextar found his voice again, though it cracked slightly with strain. You cannot simply withdraw from Council programs. There are procedures, requirements. Requirements? Sarah interrupted, her smile taking on a razor's edge. I thought you just established that the Council isn't required to justify its decisions. Surely that principle applies equally to all members? Or is that another one of those complex factors that junior species can't comprehend? The logic was flawless and devastating. By declaring that the Council didn't need to justify its decisions, Vextar had inadvertently given humanity the same freedom. Several of the more astute species began to realize that the humans had just turned the Council's own arrogance against them. Third, Sarah continued, consulting her datapad again, humanity will be suspending our voluntary compliance with several Council economic regulations that appear to specifically disadvantage newer members while benefiting established powers. Since these regulations weren't properly explained as discriminatory measures, we consider our previous compliance to have been obtained under false pretenses. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications of Sarah's words sank in. She wasn't just challenging Council authority. She was systematically dismantling the entire framework of assumptions that kept the galactic government functioning. Fourth, we'll be reaching out to other species who might be interested in discussing alternative arrangements for trade, defense, and cultural exchange. It seems clear that the Council system isn't designed to serve everyone's interests equally, so perhaps it's time to explore other options. Now, even the founding species were paying close attention. The humans were essentially threatening to create a rival power bloc, something that could destabilize the entire galactic political order. But they were doing it so politely that it was almost impossible to object without looking tyrannical. Vexatar was beginning to realize that what he had thought was a minor irritation from an unimportant species had somehow transformed into a major crisis, threatening the Council's fundamental authority. And worse, it was happening in full view of every member species. You're making a serious mistake, Ambassador Chen, Vexatar said, his voice carrying clear menace. The Council has ways of dealing with disruptive elements. For the first time since the exchange began, Sarah's diplomatic smile faltered, but what replaced it wasn't fear or uncertainty. It was something much more dangerous. Counselor Vextar, she said, her voice dropping to a level that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. I want to make sure I understand you correctly. Are you threatening humanity with retaliation for exercising the same rights and freedoms that you just claimed for the Council? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Every species in the chamber understood that how Vexatar answered would determine whether the Galactic Council continued to exist as a cooperative body or revealed itself as nothing more than a protection racket run by the founding species. Sarah waited, her expression now completely neutral, except for her eyes, which held a coldness that reminded everyone present that humans were a predator species that had climbed to the top of their world's food chain not through strength or speed, but through intelligence, cooperation, and an absolute refusal to back down when cornered. The polite mask was finally off, and the Council was about to discover what had been hiding behind it all along. Counselor Vextar stared at Ambassador Sarah Chen, his reptilian brain finally recognizing the trap he had walked into. Every word he had spoken, every dismissive gesture, every condescending remark had been carefully recorded and broadcast throughout the galaxy. The humans hadn't just challenged the Council. They had maneuvered the Drakmari into exposing the corruption and hypocrisy at the heart of galactic government. "The Council does not make threats," Vexitar said finally, his voice carefully controlled. But the damage was already done. His previous statement hung in the air like a smoking gun. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her posture that reminded several species of coiled springs under tension. "I'm glad to hear that, Counselor, because humanity doesn't respond well to threats. We have a rather unfortunate history with beings who believe might makes right." She stepped forward slightly, and the movement somehow commanded the attention of every creature in the vast chamber. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there during 3 years of diplomatic pleasantries. "You see, there's something about humans that we've tried very hard not to mention during our time in the Council. We didn't want to alarm anyone or create unnecessary tension. We thought it would be better to prove ourselves through peaceful cooperation and mutual respect." Sarah paused, looking around the chamber with eyes that seemed to catalog every face, every expression, every sign of fear or hostility or curiosity. "But since we're apparently abandoning the pretense of equality and mutual respect, perhaps it's time for some honesty about what humanity really is." The silence in the chamber was so complete that the environmental system seemed loud by comparison. Even the usually restless klaxons had gone completely still, their insectoid forms frozen in anticipation. "Humanity is the only species in this chamber that evolved as persistence hunters," Sarah said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Do you know what that means, Counselor Vexitar?" Vexitar didn't respond, but several other species shifted uncomfortably. They were beginning to understand that this seemingly fragile human was about to reveal something that would change their perspective on the newest council members forever. "It means that when we decide something needs to be caught, we don't rely on speed or strength or camouflage. We just keep coming. We follow our prey for days, weeks, months, if necessary. We never give up, we never get tired, and we never stop adapting our approach until we get what we're after." Sarah's voice remained perfectly calm and pleasant, but her words seemed to resonate through the chamber like the distant rumble of an approaching storm. "For 3 years, we've been the perfect junior species. Polite, patient, cooperative, eager to please. We followed every rule, met every requirement, exceeded every expectation. We thought that was what being civilized meant, working within the system, respecting the hierarchy, proving ourselves worthy of the equality we were promised." She turned to look directly at Vexitar, and the Drakmari counselor found himself unable to look away from those predators' eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "But today you've taught us that the system was never designed to include us as equals. Today you've shown us that no amount of cooperation or achievement will ever be enough, because the game is rigged from the start. And that, Counselor Vexitar, changes everything." The human ambassador reached into her case again and withdrew a second datapad, this one looking more official than the first. "This is a formal notification that humanity is invoking Article 47 of the Galactic Council Charter, the clause that allows member species to demand a full review of their membership status and benefits." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Article 47 was an obscure provision that had never been used because it essentially forced the Council to put a species membership to a galaxy-wide vote. It was designed as a theoretical safety valve, never intended for actual use. "The review will examine whether humanity has received the equal treatment and benefits promised upon our admission to the Council. Given today's revelations about hidden criteria and 2-tier membership systems, we believe the evidence will show that our membership contract has been systematically breached." Vexitar finally found his voice again, though it came out as more of a croak. "You can't be serious. Article 47 would require testimony from hundreds of species, examination of thousands of trade agreements, complete transparency about council decision-making processes." "Yes," Sarah agreed pleasantly. "Complete transparency. Every closed session, every private agreement, every backdoor deal that shaped council policy for the past 3 centuries. All of it open for review by every member species. The implications hit the chamber like a sonic boom. The founding species had built their power on precisely the kind of hidden arrangements and private deals that would be exposed by an Article 47 review. Their stranglehold on galactic politics depended on other species not knowing exactly how decisions were made or who benefited from them. Sarah continued as if she were discussing lunch plans. Of course, if humanity were suddenly to receive fair and equal treatment, including immediate access to the Meridian Sector trade routes, we might reconsider the necessity of such a comprehensive review. After all, we're reasonable beings who prefer cooperation to conflict. Now every species in the chamber understood what they were witnessing. The humans hadn't just challenged the Council's authority. They had declared war on the entire system of galactic governance, using the Council's own rules as weapons. And they had done it so cleverly that the founding species couldn't retaliate without confirming everything the humans had accused them of. Vexitar looked around the chamber, seeking support from his allies among the founding species. But what he saw in their expressions was calculation, not solidarity. They were already weighing the cost of supporting him against the potential benefits of abandoning him to the humans. "This is blackmail," Vexitar said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah's diplomatic smile returned, but now it looked like the expression of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Counselor Vexitar, I'm shocked that you would characterize a formal legal proceeding as blackmail. Are you suggesting that there's something in the Council's decision-making processes that wouldn't stand up to public scrutiny? The trap was perfect and inescapable. Any response Vexitar gave would either admit corruption or validate humanity's right to invoke Article 47. He had been outmaneuvered by a species he had dismissed as insignificant, using nothing but their own rules and his own arrogance against him." The chamber fell silent again as hundreds of alien minds processed what they had witnessed. The humans had just dismantled the most powerful political structure in the galaxy, using parliamentary procedure and basic logic. They had transformed themselves from supplicants to predators without raising their voices or making a single threat. Finally, Counselor Zethari of the Vorthok spoke, his crystalline form shimmering with patterns that indicated deep thought. "Perhaps we should consider a brief recess to discuss the human petition in more detail." Sarah turned to face the new speaker, her expression brightening with what looked like genuine pleasure. "What a wonderful suggestion, Counselor Zethari. We would very much appreciate the Council's careful consideration of our request. Take all the time you need." The subtext was clear to everyone present. The humans would wait, because waiting was what persistence hunters did best. And while the Council deliberated, word of this session would spread throughout the galaxy, carrying with it the revelation that the mighty Galactic Council could be backed into a corner by a single human with a diplomatic smile and an understanding of their own rules. As the session was called into recess, Sarah Chen gathered her data pads with the same calm efficiency she had shown for 3 years. But now everyone in the chamber understood that beneath that diplomatic exterior was something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Humanity had finally stopped pretending to be harmless, and the galaxy would never be the same. The other species watched in fascination and growing respect as the human delegation filed out of the chamber. They moved with the same quiet confidence they had always shown, but now it looked less like politeness and more like the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Behind them, the founding species huddled together in urgent conversation, trying to find a way out of the elegant trap the humans had constructed. But they were beginning to realize that they faced an opponent who had spent 3 years studying their weaknesses while presenting no apparent threat in return. The humans had learned to hunt in space, and they had chosen the most dangerous prey in the galaxy, the system itself. As news of the session spread through the council stations and beyond, other junior species began to take note. If humanity could challenge the founding species and win, perhaps they weren't as powerless as they had believed. Perhaps it was time to stop accepting scraps and demand their fair share of the galaxy's opportunities. The age of human politeness was over. The age of human equality had begun. And those who had grown comfortable with the old system were about to discover that evolution didn't stop just because you reached the stars. The humans had finally taken off their masks, and the face beneath was that of a species that had never learned the meaning of surrender.